anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me, and it is our Friday weekend edition. And as I mentioned yesterday, we're privileged to have two lawyers with First Liberty Institute. Of course, Kelly Shackelford, CEO, Chief Counsel for First Liberty Institute, as well as Erin Smith, who is Associate Counsel. And Kelly, I've already talked about what we'll focus some of our time and attention on, because last week and the week before, you encouraged people to pray about a case that maybe the Supreme Court would hear, and that's exactly what has happened.
It's really a blessing. I do this all the time. I'm looking at all of our cases, and certainly when we have cases going to the Supreme Court where you're asking them to take it, they get about 7,000, sometimes up to 8,000 requests a year. They took 56 last year.
Yeah.
So you can see your odds are, let me see, 56 out of 7,000, not good odds, right? And so the one that I just really, really, really prayed, and that's why I asked Point of View listeners to pray for too, was the Olivier case. And really it was because, I just thought what an honor it's been that we've gotten to do the Bladensburg Cross case, right? I mean, representing everybody really who has given for our country, especially those who have died for our country and the memorials all around the country. That we got to represent Coach Kennedy in what was a case that really overturned
Such a good one.
The biggest, the worst anti-religious freedom precedent in the country. We overturned. For 50 years it had been in place. That we got to do the huge school choice case that allows every parent to choose Christian schools, religious schools for their kids. That'll be a huge future thing. And the Groff case, which is the biggest case on religious freedom in the workplace in 50 years. But I thought, what an honor if they would take the Olivier case, because I thought, now we're really dealing with somebody who's sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. And they really haven't dealt with one of those sharing the gospel in public, like in a park or whatever. In decades. And my prayer to the Lord was, what an honor it would be to represent you in that case, and what a great thing it would be to have that at the Supreme Court as a testament, to what this country is really about. And so I would pray to ask the Point of View listeners to pray, and they took it. They took it. I thought it was great. They took it. They made the announcement the day before the 4th of July. And so that made for a good 4th of July celebration. And it's the technical parts of the case are it's fascinating, because I'll just give you the quick summary, which is this is about a guy who just wanted to go to the park and share with people. That's kind of what he does. He goes and shares with people about the Lord, and they didn't like him going, so they created a law to say you can only speak in the park in this little portion in the corner here. And if you walk outside of that, then it's a crime. Okay, we're gonna criminally prosecute you, and that's what they did. And this is where it gets really crazy, right? So you're dealing with a basic First Amendment right of free speech and free exercise of religion, but then they said, well, really, you can't. He wants to challenge this to make clear that he can go out and talk to people. They said, well, you got to wait until your criminal case is over. You can't really challenge it until it's over. Okay, well, then what I'll do is I'll just pay the fine, say nolo contendere, meaning I'm not guilty or innocent, and then I'll bring the lawsuit. And so then he brings a lawsuit, and they say, well, now that you're guilty, there's this Supreme Court case that says that if you're convicted of a crime and you're in jail, he's not in jail, okay, it was a fine, then you can't bring a lawsuit.
Yeah.
So as some of the judges said, later, so he can't bring a lawsuit before and he can't bring a lawsuit after. So they've not only taken away his First Amendment rights, his most basic First Amendment rights, but they've also said, and you never have a chance to be into court to assert your First Amendment rights. So every citizen, really, this is about every citizen's free speech rights, their free exercise of religion rights, and their right to have a day in court.
Yeah.
So it's a really unique case that we just haven't seen anything like this in a long time.
Erin, I want to come to you because, in law school, you've probably learned that we have a freedom of speech and freedom of religion, and I don't see that it's freedom of speech just in the protest area that was set aside by the city council, right?
Right. I mean, yeah, so this is a public area. It's a public park, and it's very clear that if you're in a public park like that, you can share what you think with people that are willing to listen. You could say it. They don't have to listen to you. There's nothing that in the law that says, just because someone doesn't want to hear someone else's opinion, that they get to, keep them from speaking. And so that's one of the cool things about America, really, is I can go say my opinion and it might offend some people, but that's okay. Sometimes what they say offends me, but I'm not going to have them thrown in jail for that.
I've done some of these free speech platforms. I can remember one that really still gets me at the Boulder, Colorado, University of Colorado, which is a little more on the liberal side and people shouting at me and everything. But Kelly, this one is in the city of Brandon, Mississippi. How in the world did that happen?
Well, people don't like, they've never liked people who want to share things in public. They just don't like it. They don't like it. They're like, hey, don't bother me. I don't want to listen to what you've got to say.
I just would never have guessed.
It's look, one of our biggest cases on the persecution of the church is in a city that's supposed to be conservative. It's the case of Chris Savelle, the pastor, who has actually been sentenced to 60 days in jail.
That's true.
Because he would not lock the doors of his church when people were freezing on the street outside of his church. So it's common, unfortunately, doesn't seem to matter, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, to say, hey, we run this city. We don't like you disrupting. We had another one that we just ended that has some similarity. This is in Waco, Texas, where they said, hey, we're not going to allow you to engage in free speech, pastor, who wanted to witness to people at an LGBT event, and they didn't want him to. So this is very conservative, supposedly a lot of religious, all controlling the city council. They banned him from free speech until we had to get involved, and they've now backed down after months of having to go through this on behalf of this pastor. But he's trying to do exactly what Jesus did, which is go and talk to people who don't know the Lord and try to change their lives forever.
Let me just mention that, first of all, I'll hold up for those of you watching online. This is the FLI Insider, and it has, of course, the one about the Brazos Park, so we'll talk about that when we come back from the break. It also talks about the fact, as we mentioned just the other day, but I wanted you both to get into it, and that is whether pastors and churches can endorse a candidate, because we've always heard with the Johnson Amendment that was passed by Senator Lyndon Johnson when he was running for re-election by a voice vote. It was something that seemed to be used to silence churches. So we've got a lot more to cover. Before we're all done, of course, we'll also talk about politics in the pulpit. We're going to talk about all the things happening with ICE and maybe some investigation of some of the deep state. We've got a lot to cover. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
In previous commentaries, I've talked about woke corporations and the inevitable corporate backlash. It is worth discussing how some of this occurred. Brittany Bernstein talks about some of the people and organizations that have brought pressure to these businesses and corporations. Two that she mentioned have been on my radio program: David Bahnsen, a financial advisor, and Lathan Watts, VP of Public Affairs for Alliance Defending Freedom. Many of these companies have seen what happened to Target and Bud Light, but others did not change until David Bahnsen filed a shareholder resolution calling for the company to account for its discriminatory ad purchases and DEI programs. corporate executives often decide not to even fight the issue at a shareholders meeting. The recent victory in dealing with PepsiCo is a clear indication. They adopted a policy of viewpoint neutrality in choosing where to place its ads in exchange for Bahnsen withdrawing his resolution from the ballot. Alliance Defending Freedom has a viewpoint diversity business index that rates companies on issues ranging from censorship issues to debanking to DEI to ESG. As I've also discussed in previous commentaries, the problem of debanking is an issue that needs to be addressed. J.P. Morgan Chase has a history of debanking customers for religious or political reasons. Because of the pressure from Bahnsen and ADF, J.P. Morgan Chase adopted in its code of conduct protections against religious and political viewpoint discrimination. These actions, coupled with policies from the Trump administration and a Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action, are making incremental changes in the corporate culture. These are encouraging signs. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Racism, go to viewpoints.info/racism. That's viewpoints.info/racism. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, we'll open up the phones, but I suspect most of you just going to sit back and listen and learn, because in some respects, what is happening right now in some of these places, we'll talk about Mississippi as we did just a minute ago. Now we're going to talk about the state of Texas. Then we're going to talk about these power rankings for religious liberty in every one of the states where we're broadcasting. But again, it's important for you to know what your rights are and engage. Maybe you're not engaged in religious speech, but maybe you want to have an event or maybe you want to have a table and you say, I don't think they're allowed to shut us down here in a public place. And that's why you may want to again eventually call First Liberty. Our first article is the press release about what happened in Mississippi. Let's now talk about what happened in Waco. And again, Erin, this is, I guess, what is called Brazos Park East. City of Waco announced that it was going to just keep Pastor Ronnie Holmes and the Church of the Open Door from sharing their faith in the park. This sounds like deja vu all over again. What about this?
Yeah, it's funny. It's like it keeps happening. Maybe they think, hey, if we use the free speech zone enough times, one of these times it's going to be okay and it's going to work. So maybe they need to communicate with each other about how this doesn't work. But yeah, so Pastor Ronnie Holmes and the Church of the Open Door, they went out last October to share the gospel with people that were attending this out on the Brazos Festival that's hosted by the Waco Pride Network. And the police came to them and said, hey, you need to go over here into this free speech zone, like 50 yards away. And I don't know if you've ever tried to talk to somebody from 50 yards away, but it was pointless, right? No one was going over there interacting with them.
And they have done this on campuses because I've been subjected to some of that too.
The park stays open. It wasn't closed to the public at all. This wasn't a closed event. This is open to the public. And so we told the city of Waco, we were like, you can't do this. Like, it's a public park and you need to let him share the gospel. And finally, the city of Waco came around and they understand now, after we helped clear it up for them what the First Amendment allows, and they're going to allow Pastor Holmes and the Church of the Open Door to come to the park and share the gospel. And they're not going to put them in this free speech zone because they said, Never mind. No more free speech zone. The whole park is a free speech zone.
Kelly, there got to be people all over the country right now listening to this saying, I think we have a free speech zone that was established in our park, and maybe we should challenge some of this.
Well, yeah, that's unconstitutional.
Yes.
You can't make the church of the open door the church of the closed door. You just can't. What they're trying to do is crazy. I mean, any American, I think, would realize. Do you think the government can? I mean, this idea that I'm sure the founders meant, yeah, you have a right of free speech as long as over there, somewhere else. Not around me,
NIMBY, not my backyard.
Yeah, and it's like no, that's the whole point of free speech, right? It reminds me of the decisions that used to come out. I think we're past this now. I don't know, but there's a number of decisions you can read around the country from 20 years ago, 25 years ago that said, well, you have a right to free speech and even religious speech as long as it's not proselytizing. And now, proselytizing means trying to persuade. So what you're saying is, I'm sure the founders would be fascinated by this idea that you can engage in free speech as long as you're not trying to persuade anybody of anything. I mean, that's the whole purpose for free speech. Mm-hmm. So there's just a lot of and again, it's back to what we talked about earlier. Why would people do this? Why would a place with conservative city council do this? Well, it's because they don't like free speech, because it's uncomfortable. The truth makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And certainly at the very center of that, and it's why you see the cases going back to the beginning of our country, is the right to share your faith.
Yes.
I mean, this is kind of why our country was formed, is religious freedom. And these cases, there's a number of them, right? I mean, we've got, with very similar facts. So here, the Supreme Court just took one. And so hopefully this will begin to clear things up. But
let's hope so. It's
not going to deal just with that issue. It's going to deal with whether he even has a right to get in court. Mm-hmm. But I have a feeling we're going to have to do this for some longer period of time, and just the people's right to share and be in a public park or a public. We've got another case that we're waiting to hear. I think the briefs are all in. We've talked about it a lot before. It's the Cambridge Christian case where you had two in the high school football championship game. Two Christian schools were not allowed to have a prayer before the game, and really what they were doing is saying, well, this would violate separation of church and state because you're going to use a government microphone. And then they realized that wasn't going to work, and they kind of went to, well, it's really government speech, not private speech. And very dangerous on all ends. I mean, so if government property, so I guess a public park is government property, right?
Here we go.
A sidewalk. So what you're really saying is you cannot pray in public, right? It's always a violation of separate if you pray in public. And then what's really creepy about this is this effort to say, well, that's not really your private speech, even though you're praying. That's really government speech because you're doing it on our facilities. Well, if you can turn everybody's private speech into your government speech, you just wipe away free speech. And so that's why, again, huge number of requests every year for the Supreme Court to take your case, 7,000 to 8,000. They took 56 last year, so your odds are not very good. So most people will not file an amicus brief to the Supreme Court saying, please take this case, because you're not going to spend $25,000, $50,000
right
when it's just, 99-something%.
Yeah. No.
Well, when we had the Coach Kennedy case, we had 11 amicus briefs come in.
Very good.
Okay,
yes.
Which is a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We had, I think, somewhere around that for the big school choice case, the Carson versus Macon case. We just filed the Cambridge Christian School case. 21 amicus briefs came in, and it's because everybody sees the implications of this. They're really the stripping away of free speech, the stripping away of religious freedom in all kinds of contexts if this isn't corrected. So we're hoping they'll take this case. It's pray for the Olivier case now that they've taken it, that we win, and then pray that they take the Cambridge Christian case. And if so, we'll have some great cases before the court that we can really create some really good precedent on.
Let me just mention, too, that one of the banners we have up right now says Pray for America. The one that just went out, because we just signed off on it, is on Kerrville. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. But if it's still up in the air, we might put the Cambridge case on that, because let me use this, Erin, since I'm the old guy around the table, I always like to mention, Billy Graham did a evangelistic outreach in the very same place where they say you can't have a prayer. Now, just think about the insanity of that comment.
Yeah,
Right.
40 years ago.
Yeah.
40 years ago, it was okay. Now,
Yeah.
and it's, two Christian schools can't have a prayer before their state championship football game.
Yes. When we come back from the break, I want to get your comments about another one, and it's your lead article, Churches and Religious Organizations Can Endorse Political Candidates. And a lot of that has to do with the Johnson Amendment. And Kelly can help me out with this, but back in 1948, Senator Lyndon Johnson just barely won. He ran against Coke Stevens. And as a matter of fact, there have been a lot of questions about the electoral integrity there. Matter of fact, one of those particular precincts voted in perfect alphabetical order. So, of course, 6 years later now, he is running again. And in this particular case, concerned that it might be another close race, and given the fact that there are some of these anti-communist groups, he was able to get past what's called the Johnson Amendment. And what that simply says is that if you are a 501c3 organization, which a church is, you cannot be involved in political activity. And Kelly, this has been the bane of a lot of pastors, or the excuse of a lot of pastors, who simply said, well, because of the Johnson Amendment, we can't actually address politics from the pulpit.
Yeah, and one of the sad thing about all this is that Johnson never meant this to apply to churches.
No.
It was just the people that were attacking him were 501c3 nonprofit groups that were secular groups. They were more political groups. And again, I don't think he would have ever meant to do it also, because it's unconstitutional. You can't tell a church that they can't say something with regard to some political event or policy or person. They can say whatever they want. And but yet 70 years we've had to deal with this. And now it looks like it may be, forever done. Certainly it is for now, but we can talk about that after the break.
That's our third article, but also, again, you can get the FLI Insider, and we encourage you to sign up for that. And then we'll move on to some others, just to give you kind of a counterpoint. Cal Thomas always a little bit concerned about people that address politics from the pulpit. Of course, my argument is, if you don't address from the pulpit, where are you going to hear from it? Fox News, MSNBC? Maybe you need to rethink that. So we'll come back and talk about that right after this.
Who can you trust? Years ago, many of us could probably have provided a fairly long list, but today it seems we almost can't trust anyone. Educators don't even know what a woman is anymore. Many so-called public servants have shown all they care about is themselves. The FBI has been accused of bias, law-breaking, betrayal, and journalism. It's largely corrupt, with no Clark Kent standing up for truth, justice, and the American way. All of this is why Point of View Radio is more important than ever, and your part in supporting us is more needed than ever. Do your part today in supporting trustworthy truth. Stand with us and help push back the lies and the darkness. Visit pointofview.net. Don't put it off. Take a moment right now and click on that big blue button that says Donate Now, or call to invest at 1-800-347-5151, pointofview.net, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
In studio with me today, Kelly Shackelford, Erin Smith. And Kelly, sometimes when we are in an election season, I recommend a resource that you have at First Liberty on what you can and cannot do. And as we've said before, the IRS still gives you so much freedom that things that I would assume most pastors would never want to do are still oftentimes allowed. But one of the big excuses sometimes from pastors is, well, I really can't address this issue because of the Johnson Amendment. And of course, I also give you a piece by Cal Thomas in which he says pastors need to stay in their lane. And though I have Cal on the program, consider him a very good friend, I sort of have the question, if pastors aren't going to educate the congregation about issues, moral issues, social issues, even where candidates might stand on an issue by having voter guides, where are they going to learn that other than from the church? So if nothing else, this excuse kind of fades away now, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot to say about this. I'm on this Religious Liberty Commission, the President's Religious Liberty Commission, and I was going to propose something like what just happened. They beat us, to the gun here. We've had 3 cases in the last year of churches,
yes,
who were threatened by the IRS baselessly, and we responded, and they said, we need all this information from you. I mean, think of this. The government is asking for a bunch of information from the church.
Oh, I know.
Right? And our response was, and we had one of the most powerful law firms in the world join us, was you have zero authority in the pulpit of a church in the United States of America. And we cite about 13 Supreme Court cases. Mm-hmm. And then we say, we're giving you nothing. See ya. And every time we did it, they dropped the case.
Isn't that amazing?
So this is what was happening is
just intimidation.
You had this regulation that is clearly unconstitutional if you apply it to churches, right? And yet you could never get a decision because every time a church said, come on, let's go, the IRS didn't want that because that would make it clear that they couldn't do this. Mm-hmm. And so this was like the never-ending sort of boogeyman, and, well, that's now going to be over, it looks like. What happened is you had a lawsuit filed by the NRB and a couple of Texas churches, now I personally think they had a serious issue of standing, of being able to bring this, right. But it hadn't been thrown out yet, mm-hmm. and it was in court. And now you've got an administration that kind of looks at this and says, yeah, this really is a violation of the First Amendment. So why don't we just agree that this is not going to happen? Well, but the issue with this is the consent decree that they would enter into. It's clear, number one, the IRS has this position throughout the Trump presidency. What's significant about this is a consent decree that is being proposed to the court. If the court accepts the consent decree, which usually they would, it will bind the IRS from now on.
That's very good.
To not do. Now, it doesn't. They didn't say, hey, yeah, the church can become a PAC or give money to. But the point is, it says in your regular communication to your church, like in a sermon, like how you talk amongst you as a group, you have a right to talk about political issues, political people, political candidates. I mean, you have a First Amendment right, and we don't have any authority against that. So that is going to, I think you sort of hinted at the big issue to me. The churches have always had the freedom to do this, mm-hmm. but a lot of pastors liked being able to say, well, I'm so sorry, the IRS tells me I can't do this. Well, that excuse just got taken away.
Yeah.
And so, look, I disagree with Cal on a couple of things.
Sure.
Number one, this isn't just about a pastor getting up and endorsing from the pulpit. And by the way, the pastor can endorse whoever they could be the campaign chairman. It's just the 501c3 entity that the IRS would say before you couldn't do it. This is also about talking about the issues, referencing candidates and their stances on issues, on moral and biblical issues. And the job of the pastor is to equip the saints to represent Christ in every area of society. And so and it's what you said, Kerby, if the pastor is not educating them on these moral issues of the day and what the Bible says, then, I mean, it's nobody else's responsibility. And so this should free the church up. And somebody said, well, I don't think they should endorse. I don't think they should endorse. It's like, it's irrelevant. It's about whether you think the government should make that decision or whether the church should make that decision. And if you don't like the church and their approach, this is the wonderful thing about America. You could choose another church. But that's very different from the government coming in and telling the church what it can and cannot do with regard to these issues.
Erin, I was just thinking about our history. One of the booklets we made available is on patriot pastors, and they used to have election sermons that would be given as a sermon before you would go and vote. Not necessarily tell you who to vote for, but give you those principles. You think of almost all the major social revolutions in this country, whether it was the abolition movement, the temperance movement, of course, the suffrage movement, women being able to vote, and all the way up to the civil rights movement and the rest. All of those came from biblical principles. So it seems to me that we should expect pastors to be addressing those issues because that's part of our history.
Yeah, absolutely. My dad a while back got me a book. It's sermons, The Pulpit of the American Revolution, right? And talking about the role that the church played in. There were a lot of people in America that felt uncomfortable about the idea of rebelling against the British crown. And it was churches. It was pastors willing to speak to their people in their churches and go, here are your biblical grounds. I'm going to explain why this is okay. You're not being disobedient to God by doing this. In fact, right, this would be honoring to the Lord because he sets up rulers to do good. King George is not doing good right now. And so we have this duty to protect ourselves, protect the rights that God has given us. And so I think it's so cool to look back through history like you're talking about and see the role that the church has played, the positive effect that it has had, even all the way back to the reason that we had people that were willing to stand up and fight to form this country.
Jonathan Mayhew is one of the pastors, and you may not know that name, but you know something he came up with, and that was no taxation without representation. Yeah. But he actually died before the American Revolution. But when he preached this sermon, they reprinted it and passed it everywhere, and it all had to do with the issue of civil disobedience. Is there ever a time when a godly man or woman under the authority of a leader would ever disobey that leader? And takes you through, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, even the Hebrew midwives, and of course, Acts 5:29, we will obey God rather than men. And so these were the kinds of sermons that were actually there in the 17th century. And then for people in the 21st century, pastors say, well, I just don't think I should address these political issues because, abortion is a political issue, immigration is a political issue, this whole gender reassignment, that's a political issue. So we really can't talk about any of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like our history is filled. You look at every major battle over moral issues, it's the church that was the leader, right? I mean, look at the abolition of slavery. Where did all those leaders come from? They came from Lane Seminary, right? Many of them going into Congress and others, and it was biblical, right? The civil rights movement, it came out of the church. Women's suffrage movement, all these different things were the moral conscience of the nation. Tony Evans did a great sermon on this in the past in general, just talking about how if there is immorality breaking out everywhere around the country, it is because the country has spiritual AIDS, meaning that their immune system is not working and the church is the one responsible for the immune system. And that's exactly right. I mean, if the churches and the pastors won't speak to these issues, even like you just say, the man and a woman, right? I mean, how hard is that, right? But the pastors need to say, they need to stand up and they need to say, this is what the Bible says. This is how you apply this issue, and they need courage, right? I mean, there's plenty of scripture on that too. Think of Joshua 1:9, where you had to over and over again in Joshua 1, right? Be strong and courageous. Be strong. God is telling them over and over again, I'm going to give you the promised land, but you're going to have to be strong and courageous. Same thing at the very end in Revelations, where it says you go into the new heavens, and it talks about what that is like and how wonderful. And then it says, but for the cowardly the vile, and cowardly is right there with all the rest.
Yes, it is.
And it's not the unbelieving, because that's the next sentence. It's the believing who are cowardly. We have got to not only know the truth, but we have to be encouraged by pastors to stand for the truth and make a difference.
One of the guests I had on this week was Gabriela Blanco. She was born in Havana, Cuba, and I was recommending a book that you and I appreciate, Live Not by Lies, because as she kept talking, I said, if you're not familiar with this book, in some respects, you're saying the same thing out of Cuba that he found when he talked to individuals that were part of the Eastern Bloc countries. And so, anyway, as one of those young voices we're going to hear again, probably at our Millennial Roundtable. We need to take a break. We'll be back right after this.
It feels like common sense is flowing back into the country as the Trump administration goes department by department, unraveling much of the woke nonsense under which decision makers have been operating. One absurd policy after another is being jettisoned and replaced with common sense directives, like the one that says sororities are for women. In early June, the U.S. Department of Education announced, quote, a sorority that admits male students is no longer a sorority by definition, and thus loses the Title IX statutory exemption for a sorority's single-sex membership practices. If you let men in, even those who call themselves trans women, you forfeit the protections a woman's organization is entitled to. In an article for the Daily Signal, Leslie Smith, attorney, advocate for women, and a member of Delta Gamma sorority, wrote that if you let men in, you're just another co-ed club, one that forces radical leftist groupthink on its female members. It wasn't so long ago that males were not even allowed upstairs in sorority houses. In fact, the year I was president of my sorority's chapter, we had to deactivate a member, require her to move out of the house mid-semester because her boyfriend was regularly climbing a tree and into her window to spend the night. We issued warnings, but the couple persisted in not only disobeying the rules, but causing extreme anguish and inconvenience to the dear friend and roommate of the offending member. I had to sign the document. I had to tell a sorority sister that she was out. The National Panhellenic Foundation, the body that oversees sororities nationwide, should have known better than to allow biological males to join sororities. But according to Leslie Smith, Panhellenic, along with the leaders of all 26 national sororities, cast aside women who dared to say what common sense and the law have always affirmed. Men do not belong in women's spaces. Hopefully, now, sororities will take their identity back. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we're going to move on in just a minute to some other topics, but one more just quick mention, and that is, it is fascinating to me, and I've been looking at this now for the last year or two, on the religious liberty in various states. And Kelly, you've got this First Liberty Center for Religion, Culture, and Democracy. It's a tongue twister, but I know that you've got some excellent people that are working there, and you're going to be releasing your latest power rankings. And one of the things I found and have found so interesting is you would think that the places where you'd have the greatest religious liberty would be red states, and the places where you have the least religious liberty would be the blue states, but that's not necessarily the case, and that's why I think people will want to get this information and find out how their state ranks.
Absolutely. And that's because sometimes when you're in a state where maybe you feel like it's a little safer from those kinds of government attacks, you don't feel a need to pass any laws.
That may be true.
And the problem is, if you wait until you get the wrong leaders, then you can't pass the laws. And so you have a mixture. In the past, at one point, Illinois was number one, and you think, Illinois, and it's because there was a heavy Catholic contingency there that even before sort of it became as liberal as it is now, had passed a number of laws protecting religious freedom for people because it could see what's coming. And so it had a bunch of things. Mm-hmm. Other states have started to overtake them now. And by the way, this is not subjective. We do this with academics who look at this totally objectively. There's a list of all the laws that all the states have on different issues protecting religious liberty, state laws. They get that big list, and then they go through the states and see who has the most protections.
Right.
And one of our goals in doing this was to create a competition. If you look on the list and you're like, why are we number 40? And so people in the legislature in those states say, hey, let's start passing some laws protecting religious freedom. And so what's happened is there's been some movement. And in fact, on Monday, we are unleashing and announcing what the new rankings are. There's a state that just vaulted into number one. And I'm going to be standing at a press conference with that governor Monday morning announcing, because this governor is very proud that their state is now number one. And I think, again, that will just cause other states to go, hey, why are they number one, right? And I just say this, people, it's a great reason if you don't get the insider, because if we have your email, every Friday we send out what you've linked on the Point of View website, the 4 or 5 biggest items of the week for religious freedom. And then if we know people on the list, we'll tell them about things like this. But it's what's great about it is you can go to the website for the Religious Liberty in the States Index. You can click on any state. You can find out how your state's doing, how it compares with the other states. You can you can click on every single law that you have in your state that protects religious freedom. You can click on everyone in the other states that you don't have. Mm-hmm. You can look at all of that. It's very easy for you to go, okay, here's what we have, here's what we're missing. These other states have it. Let's get a copy of that. Let's do that here. It's just a great way to sort of, I would encourage every Point of View listener, get this, and then call your representative and say, why aren't we number one?
Yeah.
And send them this. Last time I was in a crowd of legislators and we showed this, the first guy up to talk to me afterwards was from Texas, and he said, I want a list of every one of those laws we don't have because I'm going to try to get them all passed.
And it's further down the list, too, which
yes,
has surprised me.
It's like halfway down the list,
yes,
Texas is.
Yes. And so I've clicked on it before and seen where some of the states are, but once that comes out on Monday, we'll see if we can put a link on it, and then people can find it as well, because that is certainly the case. And I thought just for a second, before we get to some of these other issues, let's talk about the importance of faith, because right now we still have people all over the country aware of what happened in Kerrville. And Erin, I don't know about you, but since we know of friends who have lost loved ones, we know of individuals that were at Camp Mystic, this really hits very hard. And it seems to me that I want to give a shout out to all the things I know Samaritan's Purse is doing right now. I know some of the Baptist men are down there. Of course, there's the Red Cross, and there's all FEMA and a variety of others. But it does seem to me that this is a place where faith is really important, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing, right, whether it was the vigil memorial service that was held yesterday, faith is playing a key role. And it's incredible to see, right? We never want tragedy to happen. But when it does, who shows up? People with faith. And what is the thing that continues to drive people to keep going? It's their faith, and it's what they've been rooted in. And so I think it's a very unique opportunity for the Lord to use. And he will, and he does use these sorts of tragedies that occur for his glory and to encourage fellow believers. And I spent 2 summers working at summer camp, and I can't imagine
I can't
that
either.
happening. But what I do know is in any instance where I have seen people suffer unimaginable tragedy, losing a high school student, losing a child, the thing that kept them going really is their faith. And so it's been very cool to get to see people live that out and come together as one group and really unify over that.
Yeah, I know the president went to Kerrville today.
Yes.
I know that Governor Abbott met him. I know that Lieutenant Governor Patrick has been. I know he was the acting governor at the time when it happened, because Governor Abbott was out of state.
Right.
And one of the things I love about Lieutenant Governor Patrick is he is a strong man of faith, and so he led with that the whole time. In fact, he said, either today or yesterday, he said, look, we're gonna fix this. We're gonna have sirens. We're gonna get federal money, state money. We're gonna do what needs to be done. He said, but the thing that's going to get people through this is faith.
It's faith.
And I appreciate that, because it's right. And what Erin says is right. You don't see a flood of secular groups running in when these tragedies happen.
Yes.
It's the reason why there's so many hospitals are religious. These are the issues of life and death, and what life means, and caring for people. And as Jesus said, give them water and bread, right? And if you don't, really, are you really doing what faith teaches? So it's a special time for people of faith, and this is why we have lots of lawsuits over people of faith, groups of faith being excluded. Mm-hmm. When they're the real answer to these tragedies
Food
and to these
and
situations.
shelter and all those things.
Yes,
for sure.
and so we had actually under the past administration, we had to file a lawsuit against FEMA.
Yeah,
because they were treating the churches differently than everybody else, and so thank goodness we hadn't had any of that here. And this is a heavy faith community, and so there's been a lot of outpouring. But they're going to have a special session in Texas.
Yes, they are,
to look at what happened, what can be done better. I mean, obviously, something rising 30 feet in 45 minutes is difficult to prepare for, but there are things that can be done, and I'm sure they're gonna solve those things, and maybe it'll help other states to not have this happen where there are areas that are prone to flooding.
Again, Dan Patrick, you might remember, is also the chairman of your National Religious Liberty Commission, as well as, of course, the lieutenant governor. When we come back, though, let's talk about the possible future mayor of New York City wants to Trump-proof New York City. Just down the road in Alvarado, we had an attack on ICE, so we have a lot more to cover. We'll do that right after this.
The Bible tells us not to worry, and yet there is a lot of worrying stuff in our world today. Thankfully, the Bible doesn't stop at telling us not to worry. God gives us a next step. He says we need to pray. But sometimes even knowing what to pray can be difficult. And that is why Point of View has relaunched our Pray for America movement, a series of weekly emails to guide you in prayer for our nation. Each week, you'll receive a brief update about a current issue affecting Americans, along with a written prayer that you can easily share with others. We'll also include a short free resource for you in each email so you can learn more about the issue at hand. Will you commit to pray for America? Go to pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner at the top of the page to subscribe. Again, that's pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in America. Point of View will continue after this.
I just wanted to tell you, too, how much I have appreciated Point of View over the years. I've always been taught that we take care of our own, and I feel like Point of View is one of our own because of the Christian worldview that you do promote. And so I have become a partner today, and I just want to thank you so much, and just God bless you for all that you do.
Listen, I wanted to make a quick comment. I'm a relatively new listener to the show, and I really kind of stumbled upon it more than anything because I'm doing some driving now that I wasn't in the past. And my comment really is, I think you guys and gals are more right on about the assessment of this country right now than anything I've heard. You know, I go home and I tell my wife, you've got to hear what they're talking about on the show. It's just so right on. And I tell my parents the same thing.
I'm 25 years old, and I started listening to Point of View about 4 years ago, and it has changed the way that I think and the way that I view the world around me.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we do want to talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening against ICE agents. Recognize again, these are federal agents. These are individuals that have been empowered and certainly deputized to do what is the official policy of the United States. And nevertheless, we're seeing all sorts of concerns raised by the fact that, as I mentioned just a minute ago, not that far from where we are broadcasting right now in Alvarado, Texas, you had a dozen individuals in body armor. Now they're saying dozen. The original was 11, and they were throwing firecrackers so that they would draw people out of that ICE facility so they could shoot them. You also, of course, had an individual being stabbed. That one took place, I believe it was in Oregon. Of course, you go all the way back, I mentioned just the other day, to 2019, which you had an individual assault an ICE facility in Tacoma, Washington. But then, of course, you also had the shooting in McAllen, Texas, and after a while, you just run out of talking about all those, because then we also talked about the material produced by Heather McDonald of 2 different attacks in California against ICE facilities that weren't even reported in the news. So this has become a big issue. And in the midst of this, again, we have Kelly Shackelford and Erin Smith in studio. Erin, we have an individual who might be the next mayor of the city of New York, Zohan Mamdani. And I think Kelly and I just say, if I had told Kelly a year ago that you would maybe have a Muslim Marxist militant as the mayor of New York City, he'd say, Kerby, I think you're off the deep end. But that is exactly what's happening. And he wants to have a Trump-proof New York. So let's talk about him for just a minute, because it seems like the younger you were, the more likely you were to vote for him over Andrew Cuomo. And the more educated you were, the more likely that you were a college graduate, the more likely you were to vote for him. And is it possible that the largest city in the United States and one of the most significant cities in the world will have this individual as the next mayor?
I mean, I think we were looking at how he performed in his primary and the way that people are talking in New York City. I mean, it sounds like he's got a pretty good shot at winning and becoming the next mayor of New York City, which really is a tragedy. I mean, this is such a disservice to the United States of America. New York has a storied history in all of American history, and it's a home of so many immigrants and successful American dream achieving stories. And if this guy's mayor, I mean, New York City as we know it, right, the city that never sleeps.
They're all going.
I mean,
yeah.
All of the wealth is going to leave New York City. You know where it's cheaper to run your business? Florida. You know where else it's cheaper to run your business? Texas. In fact, right, like you could go almost anywhere else, not California, but it's going to be a better place for you and your family. It's going to be safer and more free. And so gosh, a lot of these issues are coming out of the people voting for him are my age. I'm not responsible for this. I'm going to say right now, that's not me.
Mission Possible.
But you know, like something I'm noticing with my generation, there's no concept of long-term consequences for actions. It's I want something immediately and I want it now. It's TikTok, it's Reels, it's YouTube Shorts, it's the microwave, it's the air fryer. It's these things that get stuff done immediately. You want instant gratification. And so then when someone comes up on stage and says, I'm going to make your rent really, really affordable. Yeah, maybe at first. And then what happens? There's no incentive to maintain livable property. Everything is going to deteriorate. And so rent control doesn't work. But again, it's like the free speech zones. Maybe if we just tried enough times, maybe if we try rent control enough times,
Free
you'd
bus.
think, right?
Yeah.
You'd think people would learn, but apparently, right, we're seeing liberal institutions where these people are getting their degrees and they are not being told the truth or educated about history. And we're just going to make the same mistakes all over again.
Yeah, it's it's kind of scary, right? That this is even possible. I mean, I think part of it to help understand is, and Charlie Kirk talks about this a lot, the younger people, they can't buy houses, right? They have huge debts from college, which there's a story today that they're about to get all notices about that, that the free ride is over. And so they're frustrated. It's like, what happened to the American dream? I went to college and all this, and now I can't get a job. I can't buy a house. I can get a job, but I can't pay my debts. And so they're just like, they're ready to sort of, somebody talks about revolution, they're all in for it.
Yeah.
And then also, what were they taught? What was the teaching that occurred in school about communism and socialism and Marxism and how destructive these are, and even for Christians, how anti-Christian they are. At the very core of it is a hatred of God, and so I just think there's a lack of education, and there's a circumstance which causes them to move this way, and I think they've just got to be educated. That this is not good for them. This is going to be destructive. But what happens in the meantime if they were to do this in New York is New York City. You're going to have people leave. You can't have a business there. You got to get out of there. They're going to take this guy, the whole point is he's going to take your property. He's going to take your resources. That's what he's going to try to do. So it's kind of dangerous what's going to happen in New York. And then the big political question is the Democratic Party has got this schism between people who want to actually be somewhat reasonable and people who are ready to rush into Marxism and socialism. And from the statement of Ken Martin, from the head of their party, it appears like that there's enough of them where they're not going to isolate this. They're going to embrace this with a lot of the party. And so, from the Republican side, that could be wonderful, and that they can just win elections forever, or it could be really horrible. They could succeed in some places and cause a lot of destruction in the lives of people. So this is a really important thing to watch. It's not only this race; there's a few other races in the country as well, literally over embracing Marxism and socialism, and. You just wonder how educated the people are that are going to make those decisions. And
again, if that becomes the face of the national party, you can think about what that means. And as we're going to break, we'll come back and get into what that means in terms of the anti-ICE issue, because he wants to Trump-proof New York City, and he also has said some pretty discouraging and very, I guess the word here was ungraceful things about the border czar Tom Homan. But nevertheless, that's another issue, because you have more and more of these states in these cities that are sanctuary cities, sanctuary states. And Tom Homan, he says, we're going to come into them anyway. Just because you say you're not going to cooperate doesn't mean we're not going to come in and take out individuals. And some of them they've taken out in the last couple of days are wanted for murders in El Salvador, our drug bangers, gang bangers, and others from Mexico and Guatemala and Honduras. It's just unbelievable. So we'll come back and talk about what that means as well right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
In previous commentaries, I've talked about woke corporations and the inevitable corporate backlash. It is worth discussing how some of this occurred. Brittany Bernstein talks about some of the people and organizations that have brought pressure to these businesses and corporations. Two that she mentioned have been on my radio program. David Bahnsen, a financial advisor, and Lathan Watts, VP of Public Affairs for Alliance Defending Freedom. Many of these companies have seen what happened to Target and Bud Light, but others did not change until David Bahnsen filed a shareholder resolution calling for the company to account for its discriminatory ad purchases and DEI programs. Corporate executives often decide not to even fight the issue at a shareholders meeting. The recent victory in dealing with PepsiCo is a clear indication. They adopted a policy of viewpoint neutrality in choosing where to place its ads in exchange for Bahnsen withdrawing his resolution from the ballot. Alliance Defending Freedom has a viewpoint diversity business index that rates companies on issues ranging from censorship issues to debanking to DEI to ESG. As I've also discussed in previous commentaries, the problem of debanking is an issue that needs to be addressed. J.P. Morgan Chase has a history of debanking customers for religious or political reasons. Because of the pressure from Bahnsen and ADF, J.P. Morgan Chase adopted in its code of conduct protections against religious and political viewpoint discrimination. These actions, coupled with policies from the Trump administration and a Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action, are making incremental changes in the corporate culture. These are encouraging signs. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Racism, go to viewpoints.info/racism. That's viewpoints.info/racism. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Well, let's get into this issue of deportation and what is the role of the government and the rest. And I think if you go out on X, one of the things you'll see is all sorts of misinformation, and we encourage you to read widely and check the facts. And we just talked about New York. We don't have a whole lot of listeners in New York, but we have a lot in California. Governor Newsom, who is the governor of the state of California, has this picture, and this is where the ICE agents came into a field growing marijuana, only cannabis growing right there in California. Okay. And it shows kids, and this is Gavin Newsom has a picture of some kids running. It says kids running from tear gas, crying on the phone because their mother was just taken from the fields. And then, of course, some other nasty comments by the Governor Gavin Newsom. Well, the Commissioner of Border Protection, Rodney Scott, said, what the picture is of 10 juveniles found in this marijuana facility. All of them are illegal aliens. 8 of them are unaccompanied, and now they're under investigation for child labor violations. This is Newsom's California. We're talking about slave labor here in the state of California. So when people get all upset about an ICE agent coming in and doing deportation, in some cases, we're talking about criminal activity that's taking place, aren't we?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, in a lot of the instances, we're talking about criminal activity. I mean, that's really one of the reasons that the president wanted to pay attention to this. I think that why it became a pivotal point of the election itself was, man, we are seeing some crime. And where's it coming from? Well, it's coming from the people pouring over the border. All these very, very dangerous criminals that are, killing young girls, doing worse, stealing, holding people at gunpoint, carjacking, like just terrible things that you don't want to have happen to you, but you don't want it to happen to your neighbor either. And so, yeah, absolutely. it has everything to do with cleaning up America and making it safe.
One of the things I posted in my commentary on July 1st is Kash Patel, FBI director, says that since I did on July 1st, we're halfway through the year. Now we're a little further. If the rate continues, we will have the lowest murder rate ever. Now, people said, why is that? Well, John Lott looked into it and he said, well, one of those reasons is when you take individuals who are here illegally, who are a criminal element, and you take them out of the country, guess what? The crime rate goes down. Number two, Kash Patel also has taken some of those FBI agents that were there in the District of Columbia, and they were investigating all sorts of crime like, Catholics that were involved in trying to save lives of the unborn, and parents that were showing up at school board meetings and the rest. And you take about a third of those people and put them out into where the crimes are taking place. All of a sudden, you then have more police presence there. And number three, when you deport some of the people with the criminal element, some of the others in the criminal element, they don't go out into the streets. And so we are on track to have the lowest murder rate ever. Who would have known?
Yeah,
Who would have
amazing,
guessed?
right? Like one of the guys they just caught was a head of MS-13.
There you go.
I mean, murdered many people, and he came in, by the way, during the Biden administration, and was allegedly vetted, which is a lie.
Yes,
because they specifically from the country they said, look, he's killed 8 people here. They had I forget what the name of the foreign country sort of telegram or notice or whatever that they sent, but there's no way he should have gotten in the country. And so if the head of the MS-13 gang can get in, again, not sneaking through with nobody finding him, but actually getting in through the process, you can imagine the people that are in the country. And so it's really odd, like this video that's all over today with some illegal immigrants running from ICE into a hospital, and then having some of the medical people there literally physically putting their hands on the ICE officers. Now, number one, those people were caught, and I think there will be criminal charges coming against those medical personnel. It was ridiculous what they're doing, and boy, don't ever do that. You've got, whether it's a police officer and there's somebody and they're pursuing a criminal, and you're going to put your hands on the police officer? I mean, do you have a death wish? I am actually amazed at how ICE has restrained themselves in these situations.
And some people are starting to say maybe they shouldn't.
Yeah, and I'm sure that they've been taught that, hey, this is what they want. It's sort of this Marxist deal of we'll just eventually have somebody get hurt, and we'll tempt ICE enough where they would do something to in furtherance of their duty, and then we'll use that for like the revolution. This is really bad, and again, I think some of the Democratic leaders are realizing that they have to, if they don't speak up against these type of things, that they're going to be responsible because of a lot of the language they've already used, calling them Gestapo and all these, including Newsom. But some of their leaders, you're seeing some. I saw a senator, I saw some others on the Democratic side beginning to speak out because I think they realize something is going to happen. And if it does, it's going to be pinned on them. And it's just going to continue the free fall they're having because of this issue and not handling it very well.
Yeah, one of those is John Fetterman. And, of course, we had Jeff Mateer on here the other day. Who would have guessed we'd be saying John Fetterman is the common sense in the Democratic Party? But back to that, we quoted yesterday from Axios, which, again, is more left of center. But they said they'd been interviewing some of these Democratic leaders who, when they go to these radicals, the radicals say, no, you're not doing enough. Civility isn't working. Somebody's going to have to get shot. We need blood on the street so that we can really raise this up. So that argument that some of them are trying to push the envelope so that some kind of confrontation takes place, so they have a George Floyd or something like that to then use, is, I think, one of the great concerns.
I really think sometimes that Trump has like a secret group that is having his opponents do all the most ridiculous things, right?
They focus on the 20%. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
the 10%.
I've never seen.
I know.
I've never seen this type of gifting to the Trumps. I mean, for instance, when all these things, these riots are going down in L.A. I mean, not only do they do this stuff, but they carry foreign flags. Let's see how many Americans we can alienate. You know, they're illegal and they're like, oh, we're not about America, we're about this country, and you see, and just like now, like instead of, you know, if they were smart, what they would do is they would wait until ICE, you know, arrested people that are more sympathetic stories that maybe aren't really bad criminals. Although they're criminals for coming illegally,
right,
but not other things. And maybe they're, you know, that would be a much smarter way, but not, no. We need to go to violence against the law enforcement officials. It's like, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how Trump gets all these gifts, but he gets a lot of gifts because certainly this is not being played well in a way that will be successful for the other side.
And you know the other side is not doing well because you watch CNN, and I don't recommend it for the faint-hearted, but I do. And they have this one individual that shows these graphs, and he says, look at this, you know, most Americans agree with deportation. Most Americans are against these riots, and on. And he's so enthusiastic, and you can see some of the people on CNN going, yeah, I know, you don't have to drive it into the ground here a little bit, but that is certainly the case. But as we go to a break, because we're going to move on to some other topics, because I do want to get into this CIA report and the whole idea, some of the spy chiefs and some of the investigation, everything else like this. One of the benefits of you supporting Point of View is you get the Outlook magazine. And I think you can see right now that this is one of the articles we posted recently, Borders, Immigration, Deportation in the Bible. And Kelly, you've been to seminary, in addition, of course, to being in law school. And there are verses that I think sometimes are wrenched out of context. And this one attempts to recognize that certainly when we talk about the rule of law, Romans 13, that's an issue. Should we have compassion towards immigrants? And they're referred to in the Bible as aliens. That's a word that's actually in the Bible. Yes, what about some of the biblical principles about all of that? So to give you a chance to really think through these issues, because I know as a Christian you're going, well, I have a little sympathy for what some of these individuals are going through, but to think through in a biblical sort of way is what we do here on Point of View.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot in the Scripture about borders. I mean, and the importance of that. And obviously, a lot of those verses about treating the alien fairly is talking about people that came in legally, okay? It's not talking about people who came in illegally because there is a temptation when somebody is in legally to treat them differently because they didn't grow up here, they didn't whatever, and to treat everybody with love and grace. But that doesn't mean lawlessness.
We're going to take a break. We have some other issues to cover. We will do that right after this.
Have you ever met a child you knew would do great things? They displayed remarkable imagination, understanding, and a zest for learning. Now imagine someone takes that child and instead of fostering their potential with a real education, they feed them nothing but lies. You know, that scenario isn't so far from reality. From a young age, Americans are fed a consistent stream of distorted facts, from the secular indoctrination they receive in many public schools, to the biases presented as fact in many colleges and universities, to the barrage of misinformation from the mainstream media and the lack of moral grounding in our society. It's not that Americans aren't capable of understanding the truth, it's that they aren't exposed to it enough. You can expose more Americans to the truth when you give to Point of View, where listeners receive facts, perspective, and biblical truth they don't get from society. As long as we have truth, we have hope. Give today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. We are so privileged to have in studio with us today Kelly Shackelford and Erin Smith. One of the other articles I posted there by Greg Jarrett. He's been, of course, on Fox News over the years. And there's an investigation, Kelly, and this is something we talked about a long time ago, but it isn't ancient history. It turns out that we now know a little bit more about, for example, what the former FBI Director James Comey wanted, what the Director of National Intelligence James Clapper wanted, what the former CIA Director James Brennan wanted, and how they in some ways worked with, at that time, Hillary Clinton's campaign. And anybody that's gone through the first term of Donald Trump's presidency recognized it was dominated by the Russian hoax, which we now know was a hoax. And so they're going to investigate, finally.
Yeah, it's a serious deal, and it's not, people would say, oh, it's just partisanship. It's really not. I mean, this came from the person at the CIA who has been through many administrations, is just a straight shooter. And John Ratcliffe, the head of the CIA, he is that way. I mean, I don't know anybody that's ever questioned him as being partisan or not saying anything that's truthful or, he's solid. And so, I think the first thing when I look at this information is I think there's clearly, without a question, there's been a crime by Brennan in lying to Congress. There's just no doubt.
That's an easy one, yeah.
Yeah, and so Roger Stone was put in prison for that, right? Because he supported Trump and for lying to Congress. Well, so I would have a feeling that there will be things that come out of this. Now, I don't know how much for Clapper and Comey and Brennan on some of the other things, but it's clear what they were doing. But that's, when you have to prove a criminal case, that's much more difficult than just knowing what happened. Number one, you can do a civil case against somebody, who committed a crime, and you're much more likely to succeed because it's not beyond a reasonable doubt and all the hurdles to jump over. So I don't know what the DOJ will end up deciding, but I do think at the very least, I think Brennan, there will be, action against him because there's just no doubt he lied to Congress. It's clear. And then all the other things about how this was really a criminal conspiracy and using the CIA and the just all the apparatus of government. I wish something would happen because I just wish we would teach a lesson that this should never happen again. We should never have people who are in the government trying to use the CIA, the FBI, the DOJ to weaponize against somebody politically. That should be like one of the worst things you can do because that destroys a free country, and we become like third world countries. And so I hope something comes out of this. I do think something. I just don't know how much evidence they will have to prove everything they need to prove.
Erin, it was hard to even take it seriously that somehow candidate Donald Trump colluded with Russia to somehow win the 2016 election. But back to what Kelly is saying, we're old enough to remember a time when you never would even consider the idea that an FBI director would be using something for partisan reasons or to try to prevent a candidate from coming out. We have some dark history of the FBI in terms of a couple of individuals in the 1960s, and we do have some CIA issues and the church groups, the church organization, that would be Frank Church Organization, on all of that. But still, most of the time, it was we would expect the Justice Department to be shoot straight and to be honest and not partisan. And that seems to have been evaporated over these last few decades.
Yeah, this whole thing from the very beginning, right? We've been hearing this is a lie, this isn't true, someone's lying, and for a while we didn't know who was lying. They did a good job. Everyone did a good job of spinning it to their side, and so it was a big question of, well, who's telling the truth? Who can we trust? But really, I think one of the lessons that I think I take away from all of this is, man, we got to be careful who we're putting in these positions of authority, right? And the person putting the leaders in charge of these agencies, like the CIA, like the FBI, let's have a president that's actually going to pick somebody with integrity, and will actually be transparent about what they're doing, and they're not going to go around being partisan or weaponizing this against whether it's left or right. That they're not going to pick sides and play favorites, but that the law is the law. And that's what we're here to do at the FBI. We're here to enforce the law. At the CIA, we're here to protect American interests abroad. And so whenever we stray away from that, that's dangerous, just like Kelly was saying. I mean, this is very, very, very serious. And so it matters who's in charge.
Again, that's one of the things people like to know more about in terms of the Russia collusion. But the other one they want to know about, and that's our next article, and that is they'd like to know how mentally competent the previous president was. And so I had decided I'd post this piece. I always love the material that Jim Garrity puts together. What Biden's doctor thinks you're not allowed to know. I did not expect the doctor to the former president of the United States to plead the fifth. But Kelly, there it was, right before everybody.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, it's easily taken care of by giving him immunity, right?
Yeah.
Then they can't use that. But I think he would still fall back on the doctor-patient privilege. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, but something needs to be done because while on one hand, we don't ever want the doctor to have some sort of power over the president, at the same time, we can't have, when somebody does not have the mental capacity, the idea that some people could hide that, and the doctor would go along by issuing false, prognoses. That's really problematic. So, and again, that follows with that. Then you use the auto pen,
Here we
right?
Go. That's the other part.
And you have literally people who are not elected running the government. I mean, making all the ultimate decisions. It's just that is not a democratic republic. That is not. I mean, you need to have a new election. You need to do something. You need to put the vice president in as president. It's not supposed to be that way. And I think most people are aware that to some extent it was that way. And boy, it'd be nice to get down to the facts of what happened so that we could put things in place to make sure it never happens again.
One of the things Kelly said just a minute ago, Erin, was some people will perceive this investigation on the so-called Russia collusion as partisan. I'm hearing some people saying this is partisan, but let's just take from the book Original Sin, we find out that, for example, the former president couldn't remember the names of his national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, his communications director, Katie Bedingfield, didn't recognize the DNC chairman, Jamie Harrison, Eric Swalwell, even the actor, George Clooney. The list goes on and on and on. We've all seen his inability to communicate, the debate, stumbling on the stairs, on and on and on. It seems to me that we really just don't want this to happen again. And I would think younger listeners and future voters would say, we don't want just these old folks here if they can't do the job. We want somebody that can do the job and is mentally coherent.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at the mayoral candidate in New York City. I don't know if we can say that the young people want competency.
That may be true.
But I think there are a lot of questions. Like, how is there an age where it's too old, or is it's really based on mental competency? And just because one side is in power and looking into it doesn't make it partisan.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be, right, we could have had another Democrat president that looks into this and says, hey, there were some issues. Like, we got to figure this out so that this doesn't happen again, because apparently we had a president running around or not running, and his aides were signing things for him with this machine. So it's just, who can we trust? And so I think that there's a lot of questions, especially with younger people. I think all Americans have questions that are like, can we trust the government again?
Yes.
Because they did not uphold their end of the bargain of being transparent last time. So
There's a really interesting divide if you look at it, though, between the two parties right now.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people don't like Trump, right? They don't like him. They hate him, in fact. But he's pretty transparent, okay? Whereas the other side was not transparent at all. And I think you will, after the break, we can explain this, but I think they've made a lot of mistakes that are hurting them long term.
Sure.
Because of this. Including their future presidential candidates. Again, we don't have enough time to go through it. We'll get after the break.
I'll set you up for it.
Yeah.
But again, you see him signing executive orders. Nobody has any doubts about who signed it because he's talking about it while he's signing it. So something very different. We'll come back and continue our conversation right after this.
It feels like common sense is flowing back into the country as the Trump administration goes department by department, unraveling much of the woke nonsense under which decision makers have been operating. One absurd policy after another is being jettisoned and replaced with common sense directives, like the one that says sororities are for women. In early June, the U.S. Department of Education announced, quote, "A sorority that admits male students is no longer a sorority by definition, and thus loses the Title IX statutory exemption for a sorority's single-sex membership practices. If you let men in, even those who call themselves trans women, you forfeit the protections a woman's organization is entitled to." In an article for the Daily Signal, Leslie Smith, attorney, advocate for women, and a member of Delta Gamma sorority, wrote that if you let men in, you're just another co-ed club, one that forces radical leftist groupthink on its female members. It wasn't so long ago that males were not even allowed upstairs in sorority houses. In fact, the year I was president of my sorority's chapter, we had to deactivate a member, require her to move out of the house mid-semester because her boyfriend was regularly climbing a tree and into her window to spend the night. We issued warnings, but the couple persisted in not only disobeying the rules, but causing extreme anguish and inconvenience to the dear friend and roommate of the offending member. I had to sign the document. I had to tell a sorority sister that she was out. The National Panhellenic Foundation, the body that oversees sororities nationwide, should have known better than to allow biological males to join sororities. But according to Leslie Smith, Panhellenic, along with the leaders of all 26 national sororities, cast aside women who dared to say what common sense and the law have always affirmed. Men do not belong in women's spaces. Hopefully, now, sororities will take their identity back. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Of course, we're privileged to have with us for just a few more minutes Kelly Shackelford and Erin Smith. And Kelly, you were talking about this issue of transparency. I should have kept the microphones on during the break because you had some great things to say. So again, this is a president right now that is transparent. Some people even jokingly say maybe too transparent. But what a contrast to keeping Joe Biden in the basement and out of the public eye so many times.
And you know, they're looking at his lack of capacity. And if instead of sort of this, you know, by the way, Joe Biden right now could say, I'm waiving patient-client privilege so that the doctor can say that I really was in good health. Notice he's not doing that, right? But I just want to think back, if the Democratic Party would have done things the right way, it would so much have benefited then. So, for instance, let's say they'd say, yeah, look, Joe Biden has some sort of dementia. He's stepping aside, letting the vice president. That would then allow, number one, for somebody else to have a try at the future Democratic leader. When they had a primary and they wouldn't allow anybody to run against him, they would have had all those candidates up, right? Even at the end when they did what they did and they Biden was forced to jump out of the race and put Kamala Harris in, if they would have instead of that just allowed there to be a competition at their convention, they would have had more. But they did this with Hillary Clinton.
Yes, they did.
When they cheated in favor of Bernie Sanders. If they would if they actually believed in sort of the democratic process and they would let their people make decisions and let people compete, they'd have a stable of people that would be the ones that would be shown to be the best ones to choose in a future, but they don't have that. And as a result, they have these, nobody has more than 9% or something. And so they've got a lot of radicals that are rising up and they don't know what their future is. And so this whole thing of studying the Biden capacity and everything, it just, the Trump approach sometimes is not so good. Like when you're with Zelensky in front of the international press and it's like, oh, no, they're yelling at each other. But it's a lot better to go ahead and just be open about everything than it is the other approach. It really does hurt you long term.
Yes.
And people don't trust you, especially young people. Being truthful, sincere, I think is a really important thing. And, Trump's got a lot of problems, but not saying what he means is probably not one of them.
Erin, I'm not a TikTok user, but my kids are, my two girls, and they have shown me video after video of individuals who identify as left of center, maybe even very progressive. They said, I've sort of had it with the Democratic Party because you just have a few elites making all the decisions. And they're the ones saying democracy and the democratic process is under attack, and yet they're the ones seem to be attacking that. So even people that are in the Democratic Party who probably would never vote Republican are really kind of getting fed up with what has happened over these last few decades.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they feel alienated by their own party. And so what are they going to do now? That's the question. I mean, we've seen if the Democratic Party wants to have a shot, I mean, I think they're going to have somebody more moderate come in to repair the relationships that these radical people have destroyed. And, people say the same thing about the Republican Party. Like, it swung too far right. We need a more moderate person. Well, sometimes Trump's a little bit more moderate on some issues. Then that pulled in different voters and different blocks of groups of people that wouldn't normally have voted Republican. And so you saw an adjustment on one side. I would think you'd see an adjustment on the other, but who knows? Yeah, I mean, look at Maha.
Yeah,
right. I mean,
I think that's a preview coming attractions.
We got RFK. And people have forgotten this, right? I mean, RFK is in the Trump administration.
Yeah.
Kennedy is in the Trump administration, right? I mean, this is not normal, but it's smart politics on the Trump side. And, those few percentage of people that were all about RFK could have swung a lot of these states that made the difference. So This approach of hide the ball is not a good approach in politics. It seems like it is. It seems very protective, but really, I think it's better if you're out there.
Good. Well, one of the things we always do is post Penna Dexter's commentary, and those of you hearing it on the computer right now heard it on For Women Only. And I thought, Erin, I'd come to you, one, because you're a woman, but two, because you've been in a sorority, and she's talking about some of the things happening in the sororities right now.
Yes, proud Kappa Delta, new chapter, Oklahoma State alum, and so I encouraged by Penna's commentary about the Department of Education saying, if you're a sorority, you are for women, and if you're going to let men in, you're in violation. You're not going to get these protections of being a single-sex group. Like, you're not going to get protections because you're not being a single-sex group. And just like Penna said, my sorority, men were not allowed upstairs. The only day that men were allowed upstairs was on Dad's Day, so that your dad could see a room that you just cleaned, and organized, right? And so it's encouraging to say, okay, I loved my time in a sorority, and it felt like a safe place to be because I was with all my sorority sisters. If I had been there and someone had said, hey, this man is going to be moving into this house, I mean, immediately every single girl in that house feels unsafe.
Right.
And so it's very encouraging to see the Department of Education stepping up and saying, hey, guess what? We're going to apply this the way it's supposed to.
And part of the insanity of the last, at least 4 or 5 years was when that stopped. I mean, I remember my wife was very involved in her sorority, Kappa Kappa Gamma, and all of a sudden all this stuff was happening where they were allowing, men. Mm-hmm. And there even ended up being a lawsuit because there was a sexual assault.
There you go.
And the response from the head of the person, because they had allowed a transgender onto their board, their national board, and so it was like they just totally rejected. And guess who they were rejecting? All the funders. Mm-hmm. Those old people that weren't with it, right? That fund all these houses and everything. And so I don't even know what happened. I don't know if they ever got their sorority back. But boy, this is going to force every sorority, and it should. There are protections that are given so that because otherwise you can't discriminate. Mm-hmm. What if somebody said, you can't keep me out of this sorority house because that's sex discrimination? Right? Well, they allow there to be sorority houses and fraternity houses, mm-hmm. and there are protections there to allow them to. But once you aren't, then now you got to open it up, mm-hmm. To everybody. And so this is again one of those things we would have never thought of, but got to give credit to Linda McMahon and the Trump administration for cleaning this up. This is one of his priorities, executive orders. Is this whole getting rid of this woke, this DEI stuff that was destroying the protection of women in sports, in life, and a lot of things. And this is just another great example of applying that.
I just mentioned Penedexter commentary, which is up there right now, says for women only. My commentary today, woke backlash, which we could talk about some other day. But if you do sign up for these, which we do send to your inbox, you will receive mine Monday through Friday, and Penedexter's, which we will have going out tomorrow, will land in your inbox on Saturday. We do have, of course, Pray for America. We've already encouraged you to pray for Cambridge, right? That's all
Cambridge
you really
Christian.
need to do, mm-hmm. and we'll see how that one goes. But Erin, always great to see you. Kelly, thank you for being here. And again, hope you will have a great weekend because we are looking forward to some really good interviews next week, and we'll talk more about that as we convene once again on Monday. First of all, I want to thank Megan for help engineering the program and Karen stepping in for Steve. Steve's on his way to Colorado right now. Have a great weekend. Look forward to seeing you back here on Monday right here on Point of View.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim